Right. We are at the top of the hour. So good morning, everyone. I'm Ed Greer, Dean of the School of Business at Virginia Commonwealth University. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our fourth edition of Business Conversation. We have a great topic this morning, and it's on everyone's mind. It's been on my mind for a long time. So we should have a great discussion. And I have one of our wonderful colleagues along with me, not in the same room, of course, but she's across town somewhere. Anyway, welcome. These are great conversations we've been having. We really enjoy these, but we like giving back to the community. We love calling Richmond our home, and it's much broader than that, our home, because we have alums across the globe, you know that. So we just appreciate the support we get all the time for our alum, our community leaders, everyone that supports VCU, and we love that. Well, a little bit of a housekeeping. We have about 45 minutes for a conversation this morning. Some of you have already submitted questions, which is a wonderful thing. We're using Zoom technology, and I know a number of you already know Zoom, but if you don't, there's a chat feature in the Zoom technology at the bottom of your screen. You can submit questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in that 45-minute window. Well, before I start, I'd like to give a little bit of an introduction of my colleague that's going to help me out this morning, and that's Carrie Latrum. Carrie is the executive director for Center for Sport Leadership, and she started in sport leadership about 2003 and did a number of roles there, and now she's actually the executive director, and she gained that role in 2015. In 2018, she moved sport leadership from the education to business. It's a wonderful move. Sports is a big business, and so her students have to have that business acumen now. That's just part of it. But just a little bit about Carrie. She's a wonderful leader. She's ridiculously smart. People love her. She's got a great personality. Everyone wants to work for Carrie. I want to work for her one day. She's so smart. I may be working for her one day. But it's a wonderful program. It's a master's program. It's in the top 10 in the nation, and it's a big thing we like to say all the time. It's a wonderful program, online, partially, and some of it face-to-face. But we're going to hopefully be back face-to-face. But not just about her great things as a leader. She loves sports. She was a college athlete, soccer player, not too many red cards I've heard. But she carries that banner across the globe. Sports can be one of those things that can break down barriers, as we know, culturally and otherwise. And she takes that to the fullest. She does these exchanges with coaches from the US to Africa to India and the like. Not just with coaches, she loves working with youth, young athletes also. And she's done athlete exchanges also in places you wouldn't think about. Sri Lanka, Nepal, India. So she's done all these wonderful things in the sporting world. She's just a rock star for us. She's just returned back from a year-long fellowship in South Africa. And so we just said, you can't stay forever. We love having her back. She's just a superstar, and we love having her. I'll turn it over to Carrie. She's done a wonderful job as the executive director of the Center for Sport Leadership. She has probably a number of her alums watching her today. So we're just happy to talk about this big entity that we know is sports. And that means different things for different people. But Carrie, I'll turn it over to you just to give you a little bit of time, and then we'll get into the questions right after that.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. And hi to everyone out there. Thank you so much for attending, especially our alum. I was so excited to see the list with so many familiar names on it. So I really appreciate the chance to talk about sport and how it is changing in the face of COVID-19, and just appreciate the School of Business being such a fantastic home for us as the Center for Sport Leadership, but also giving us this great platform to have some really important discussions. So I thought that it would be important to just lay a little bit of groundwork for what the sport industry is looking like these days over the past couple months in a way we have never seen or expected before. And then of course we can launch into some other topics from there. So we have been, I would say, a bit spoiled in the sport industry up until the pandemic, because many people considered the sport industry to be recession proof. We really have seen that even in economic downturns, the sport industry remained really central to the lives of people. and was able to continue to generate revenue and do well. We saw the sport industry successfully get through the transition to streaming services on TV, cutting the cord, but still sports were generally one of the only things that continued to be watched in real time. And so that was a huge advantage when it came to sponsors and other dollars. So yeah, the sport industry sort of felt like we're on this great growth path and we're sort of everything proof. And then the pandemic hit and we weren't prepared. And so I think that there had been a lot of people who hadn't really thought about, is there ever a time when there won't be any sport? And so it was, you know, going through from this really great growth market and thriving to nothing. And yeah, it's rocked the sport world for sure. And so we think of the sport industry in the US as about $100 billion industry. And typically there's 4 revenue streams coming in. So merchandising, sponsorship, media rights, and then gate receipts or ticketing. And so, you know, 3 of those 4 were immediately taken away. The 4th sort of, you know, in a recession, people aren't buying too much merchandise. And so pretty much immediately the sport industry took about a $12 billion hit. And if, I hate to say this, but if the NFL season and college football are canceled, it will more than double pretty much overnight. So, and we're not only talking pro sports, we're not only talking college athletics here, it's sport tourism, it's youth sports, it's events and arenas that host all kinds of events, it's recreation. I mean, the industry is huge and all those areas are taking financial hits. So to give a little bit of perspective to that, they say that one NFL broadcast brings in 24 million in TV rights alone per game. So you know, that's something that you would potentially be losing. College football brings in about $4 billion. And that carries athletic departments through the rest of the year. So that would be really devastating if college football gets canceled. Sport tourism is about a $32 billion industry. And while there are protections, a lot of the sport tourism, tournaments, events do carry insurance. Most of them did not carry pandemic insurance because we never thought we would need it. And so it was just something that wasn't typically seen. And jobs. There are about 3 million jobs in our industry, and a lot of those are in jeopardy now, if not already lost. I saw that the NBA said that 80% of their paid staff are game day. So that's people who work the events, taking tickets, concessions, security, et cetera. And so they're all out of work now. And even if we do come back, which I'm really hopeful, and we're starting to see a return to play, it's not going to be a return to play with fans in the arenas and stadiums right away. So a lot of these jobs are going to be very much delayed in coming back. So financially, it's really challenging right now in the sport industry for sure. Our industry has often been seen as this entertainment market, and that it was sort of had a substitution effect. So if someone wasn't going to attend a sporting event, they'd spend that money elsewhere. And I think the pandemic in a way is showing us that maybe that's not the case. Obviously right now there's not really another way to spend your money, but we're seeing the reactions of fans and how central sport was to who we were as a person and our identity. And now not having that is really shaking some of our, there's some psychological challenges that we're even seeing among fans because of that. Certainly cities and municipalities, we're seeing how dependent they were on sport tourism to fill hotel rooms and restaurants. And so, so it's just, I do think that there is becoming this recognition that sports aren't just about entertainment for us in the US, that they're much bigger than that. And so the need for them to come back in a way that makes sense for our country, I think is even more important. And so I would end this sort of intro by just saying it's not all doom and gloom. Some sport organizations have done some really creative things to manage through this and are having to think a little bit differently than they maybe were historically. And I think in the long run, that's going to make everybody stronger and better. Youth sports organizations, even locally here in town, they're starting to make their plans of how do we return to play. It certainly won't initially look like, full-on contact sports, but I think in the next month or so, you will see kids back out on the fields in different capacities. So that's really great. And just this past weekend, we saw a return to sport for NASCAR and for the German Bundesliga. Korean baseball has been playing on ESPN for the past 2 weeks, and people are watching. So there's certainly a hunger and desire for sports to be back in some capacity. And I think just this week, so the timing couldn't be better for our talk, we're finally getting there. So.
Okay. Thanks, Carrie. One of the things in your program, certainly your students coming out into the marketplace now are saying, man, what a terrible time to be graduating from this fantastic program. So how's that been for your students? And I think just going back a bit, we talked in mid-March, beginning of March, you were taking your students to, I think, South Africa on a trip, and that day we had to cancel it. So the world has changed dramatically since the beginning of March. So as entering into the marketplace, how are you helping your students along, saying, we'll get through this? I know it's tough right now, but what are you telling them right now about the future of sports in the short term, at least?
That's a great question. Yes. So we had 2 study abroads planned that were canceled. One to South Africa that was focused on sport for social change. So some organizations that are really doing great work of educating us on social issues using sport as their platform or carrot to get kids involved. And then we also had a business focused trip to Europe that we do every year, the European model of sport, to look at some of those models. We were actually going to go to a Bundesliga game. And so, yeah, those were obviously canceled, and we feel really bad because our students missed out on probably one of the most fun aspects of the program in those. But, you know, no one could have predicted this, and we're all managing through it as best we can. The message we continue to tell our students, and it's one that you wish you had a better answer, but it's patience and positivity. I think those are the 2 things that we really are trying to help our students with, and patience is really hard for all of us. But I have no doubt, and we as a program are getting together almost weekly to talk about which of the students do we need to reach out to, how are they doing. It's not just, you know, what's going on with the job search, because there aren't a lot of jobs open right now, but it's how are you managing through this? What different skills are you developing right now when you have all this downtime that can serve you well in the future? And so we've had students who, you know, we implemented this year with our students for them all to have access to the Adobe Creative Suite. And many of them are now using this time to build on what they learned in the program to get better at some of these Photoshop and InDesign that can be really valuable to them. There are lots of free learning resources where you can develop some different skills. We have connected them each with 2 of our alum to reach out to keep their networking going forward. These are all things that we have done in some form in past years, but this year we're trying to do it more. We're providing more connections to network. We're providing, you know, these talks, we're talking about having one with our alum and students coming up here in the future, just sort of a state of the CSL, to try to make sure that our students are the most ready to capitalize on taking advantage of jobs as soon as the jobs start opening again. And we have had students finding jobs, so it's not that there's nothing out there, but it's really limited right now. There are so many hiring freezes and you know, jobs being put on the back burner to be filled. So a lot of our message is really to be patient, but I would say that our approach has been to be in touch with them even more, to continue to offer them. We added another summer course that they could take that they wouldn't normally, just to continue to, you know, educate them and really be there for them, present in their lives more than we have to, because normally our students at this point are all starting their new jobs. And so this year, I would say, we certainly have a larger group who's having to practice more patience than normal.
Oh, great. Well, you know, we're all excited about returning, and not just in athletics, certainly every university across the globe is saying, how do we return and do it safely? What are you hearing from the Atlantic 10, you know, the conference that we're going to? So what's the latest news from the Atlantic 10 about returning or not?
So the Atlantic 10, I think, like most conferences across the country, are trying to come up with many different contingency plans to see how can we get back to playing in the way we want to. Short term, there were some decisions made just last week by the Atlantic 10, and I would say most of these are actually fiscally responsible decisions. So one of the challenges in college athletics right now is financial. And it's not only caused by the pandemic. I mean, I would say across the board, universities, we've been seeing some declining enrollments and just a changing face of what students look like. And so I think I think a lot of college athletic departments were already reassessing budgets before the pandemic hit to say, like, how can we maybe make better decisions financially? And then the pandemic hit, and it really caused everybody to look even more closely at how can we save more money, not knowing what the future or what this year of college athletics is going to look like. So the Atlantic 10, I think, while coaches of these sports probably hate this, it was probably the right decision from a business standpoint. So they have decided that in 7 fall and spring sports, the sports schedule is going to be reduced by 25%. So they will have shorter seasons, fewer games, and that in most of those same sports, they will also only have 4 teams that will make the final conference tournament, where in the past years it has been more than that. Of course, you don't want to hear this as a coach. You want as many games as you can, and you want more chance to make your conference tournament. But financially, it's going to save a lot of money on travel. It's going to keep students in classes more. So from that side of it, I think that it makes a lot of sense. And the athletic directors and commissioners got together to make these decisions. So fiscally, I think conferences are making really good decisions, and that's just one example of what the Atlantic 10 is doing. It also allows you, with the shorter seasons, to potentially push back the start of fall seasons a little bit and still get in all the games that you need to get in, so that if we do need to give another month or so of social distancing or phases 1 or 2, that maybe we can do that. So yeah, I think it will be interesting. I would say beyond the Atlantic 10, in terms of college athletics return, we don't know what it's going to look like. And, VCU is in a really good position because we don't have college football, and most schools that do are really desperate for that to happen because they make so much money off of their football programs, and it really helps generate a lot of the revenue that allows them to do what they do with their other sports. And so the NCAA president recently said that if campuses are closed, you can't have college athletic seasons. And all the commissioners pretty quickly came out and said, wait a second, I'm not sure we totally agree with that. And so there are sort of different versions of what it might look like coming out to say, like, well, if some students are back on campus, then college athletes can be back on campus. I mean, it certainly can't only be open for the student athletes. I think that would be a bad look, and I think most commissioners agree. But they're working through sort of different versions of what this might look like, and how, do you have to be taking classes on campus? Can they be online? So no one's really made any final decisions yet, but there are lots of conversations being had, lots of contingency plans being put into place. And so do I think that we'll have college sports in the fall? Yes, I'm generally pretty optimistic about things like that. Do I think they'll look like what they normally do? Definitely not. I don't know that fans will be attending, and I know that's really hard probably for some of you out there to hear, but that's likely the case. And then I would just add, there's so many, like, we just think about, safety of athletes making money. They may not be going in the same direction these days, but aside from those sort of big picture things we're looking at, there are so many trickle down decisions that college athletic directors and presidents have to make. Like, what about international athletes? Just at VCU, if you look at our men's soccer team, women's basketball, men's and women's tennis, golf, we have so many international student athletes, and a lot of them either can't go home, or if they went home, they can't come back because of travel restrictions. So how do you still support them properly in the way that you want to? What if, seasons are canceled? What happens with extended eligibility? You would think that it would be similar to what they did with spring sport athletes, but we're talking about a lot more athletes now. And then what if campuses are open, but an individual athlete or their family says, I'm not comfortable coming back on campus? Then what happens to their scholarship, their position on the team? So I think that we may think we're just making decisions on safety and money, but once those decisions are made, there are hundreds more that have to be made on individual basis. And so the ADs need to be have a really strong staff, be properly trained as leaders, all of these things that we're trying to prepare our students for, because it's not just purely the bottom line decision all the time. There's so many more that have to be made. And a lot of these decisions are going to be made by the presidents, the ADs consulting with the presidents, because so much relies on what the university presidents decide about the opening of their campuses in the fall. So it's going to be very interesting. I very much feel like there will be college athletics in the fall. I would be very hesitant to say fans will be attending at this point.
Well, you're very optimistic, Carrie. You always have been optimistic. And to just be clear, when you said some of the sports are reducing their schedules by 25%, that was not the basketball schedule, correct?
No.
Okay, good.
Not as basketball.
I was hearing
No,
Coach
our
Rhodes
VCU
throwing
fans
stones
wanna
at you
know.
already, so don't do that for Coach Rhodes. We're very fortunate. Coach Rhodes is very good. He's very passionate about the game. He takes care of his athletes, and certainly Ed McLaughlin's the same way, so that's very good. Let me just go back a bit when you talked about scholarships and how that works. There's this, kind of a push and pull on, you have these college athletes, they generate a lot of money for the universities and things like that, and other scholarships in jeopardy. Has there been much discussion, at least in your realm, about how scholarships will be handled for college athletes if they come on campus? Do they get extended eligibility? Have you heard much about that?
So the only thing I think I can say about that, I don't know what's been decided for the fall. And again, that's because really nothing's been decided. But for the spring sport athletes whose seasons were canceled, and I would think for fall, they'll probably follow a similar model to this if they end up having to do this. But for spring sport athletes whose sports were canceled, they were granted an extra year of eligibility. So they kind of can play that fourth or final year if they stay another year. Their scholarships can be honored, but the problem is, and they are still allowing you to bring in sort of your freshman class. So the NCAA is basically granting you this extra pool of money to still offer scholarships to incoming students and honor the ones you had promised your outgoing students. The issue with that is athletic departments have to find that extra money. And so while there is the accommodation being made to honor the scholarships, that may not fiscally be an option for some. And so then you get some coaches who are in a very awkward position who may be having to tell what would have been seniors, I can't support you next year because of this incoming class, or telling a freshman you had promised something, now I can't support you. So I do think the option to honor scholarships is there, but whether athletic departments can afford that is definitely much more up in the air. And there's over time been this debate about those sort of haves and have-nots in college athletics. Well, athletic departments who have these great flush budgets, they can do that. They can support both the, fifth-year seniors or super seniors in the incoming freshman class, but then you get to mid-majors or smaller athletic departments who just say, I can't. And so now you have this further distinction between sort of the revenue generators and those who aren't. And what position is that putting the smaller schools in who are trying to continue to compete at the same level as the majors, the Power Fives? It just becomes a really slippery slope. So I would hope that accommodation will continue to be made, but whether you can actually afford that as a school or not is another story.
You have a wonderful program, and it's top 10 in the nation for sports, and which is wonderful. Can you talk about how you're preparing your students to become your alums, obviously, for the business aspect of sport? Because it's changed dramatically. You think about all the analytics that happens, what decisions are made by coaches and athletic directors and leaders throughout the sport industry. Can you just talk about that and how that's been a benefit, I would hope, for your graduates and because of that acumen they've gained through going through your program?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, as you know, our program is called Sport Leadership, and most programs in our country and across the world are called Sport Administration or Sport Management. And while I was not part of the decision-making to name the program Sport Leadership, I do think that we really embraced that name from the beginning, but I'd say even more so in the past 5 to 10 years, where we we don't think we're just preparing people who know a lot about sport to go work in the industry. We're preparing people who we hope are going to become the decision makers and the leaders in the industry. And I think now more than ever, you're seeing how important that is, because someone who just understands sports isn't necessarily going to have the skills to make the right decision, where you have to bring in all these different factors now that we're having to think about. So some of the things that we train our students on are maybe less about sport and more about leadership or analytics or decision making in the sport context. And so that's one of the reasons we thought it was a really good fit for us to make the move into the School of Business, because we felt like we already were offering really this degree in the business of sport. And as we think about that, and as we fit into the School of Business's mission, and we think about this idea of creativity at work, well, now more than ever, we need that. And so historically, there was a model that an AD was a former football coach. Now, we've moved beyond that, but we really now today see we need someone who understands business and who understands negotiating effectively, making strategic decisions, the biases that come into decision making, building a successful team, the importance of collaboration. So emotional intelligence and empathy. I mean, if you're an athletic director who's now having to cut a sport because of a budget crisis, which I know 2 universities just yesterday announced they're going to have to do, and there will probably be more coming. Think about how you have to be able to handle that, you know, with empathy and with care and concern for someone. And so we have tried to put so much focus on the leadership aspect of things and on our students understanding the socio-cultural context of sport, and on our students having good communication skills, because ultimately those are the things that will make them successful. And we're just saying you're doing those things in a sport context. So I just really want to reiterate that I feel like right now we're seeing even more so that the people who have strong leadership skills are the ones who are going to have athletic departments or professional sport organizations or youth clubs or facilities that can come out of this pandemic stronger than others who maybe don't have that strong business acumen as a background.
Great. And I know it's tough out there, and you mentioned that there's still jobs, but it's very difficult for your students just entering the marketplace in 2020. Kind of a tough year for all of us. Let's talk about youth sports a little bit. I know you have 2 young children, and you are a college athlete yourself, soccer player, not doing red cards. You want to keep that in mind. You told me that. I'm not sure I believe it. How is your program impacting youth sports? And because it's very important as building those blocks for students that these young athletes become the pro athletes eventually, having the right mindset about the game, the leadership possibilities, the teamwork possibilities, all those things are wrapped around the sporting world. Can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I think the youth sports are very important for the future for us.
Yes, I agree. I think a lot of times in our program, we do focus on college and pro sports level and above, just because of the business model, the revenues that come into those. But the skills we're teaching our students, and we certainly have plenty coming through each year, they apply to any aspect of the industry. And so I think youth sports could look different after this. I mean, they're certainly going to, but I almost even wonder, you know, do some alternative sports emerge as a bit more popular? Because going back into a soccer field or a football program or hockey, you know, some basketball, something high contact, it's going to take a while to get back to where you're really doing that as you were before. But if you're into skateboarding or golf or tennis, you can probably go almost right back to it. So I'm curious to see if some different youth sports emerge over the next few years just because of that opportunity based on this pandemic. But yes, I agree with you that youth sports are so critical because they feed into all these programs in the end. And typically it's the parents, right, making the decision about how safe do I feel putting my child back out on the field. And so a lot of times in youth sports, the thing that we maybe don't have to think about quite as much in college and pro, maybe a little bit in college, is the parent aspect. And so we do in our sociology class and our research class, we talk about that dynamic and the changing face of youth sports in the United States, and what are the pros and cons to this professionalism model, to the recreation model. So we do try to give some attention to that, knowing that we have plenty of students who are going to go work in youth sports organizations, recreational sports organizations, for Parks and Rec. And as I said before, the sport tourism industry is huge, and a gigantic piece of that pie is youth sport tourism. And so it's something that is, I think that one's going to take a little bit of time to recover. Maybe even more so than college and professional sport, but financially it has such a great impact as well. And so we need the same skills as leaders to manage through that as we do to manage a college athletic department or a professional sport organization.
You know, one of the chat features in Zoom, I just saw one of the messages came from Sandy Sizemore, one of our big supporters of the School of Business. And she said the same thing. Youth sports equal tourism dollars. And she's so right about that. 100%. Because it will be important to building blocks, and parents want their children to be safe regardless of sports or otherwise. Let me just flip over to the international market just a bit, because you're such an international person anyway, and you've traveled the globe. Let's talk about what you were trying to do in Saudi Arabia, of all places, and how that relates to sport leadership. And I know it's on hold right now, but can you just talk about that program you were just getting ready to start over there?
Yeah, so we have been in some conversations to offer some sport leadership, sport management, strategic sports strategies training to currently employed members of the sport industry in Saudi Arabia. We've done something similar in Qatar, and it's such an emerging market when it comes to sport that it is, of course, something that we have so much interest in. We, as the CSL, one of our core values is global mindedness. And that's because we know that we don't live in this bubble anymore, right? In the United States, we live in an industry that is so broad, and there are so many lessons that we can take abroad, and there are so many lessons we can learn from programs abroad. And so being able to not only provide some expertise to organizations who are really seeking that, but also for us to be able to expand our understanding of sport across the globe allows us this great opportunity to bring so much back to our students. And so to say, I now understand sport in the Middle East or whatever context we're talking about so much better than I did before. And how can we learn about cultures and about so many different angles of sport by doing that type of thing. So we were really excited about delivering that program. We may have an opportunity to still do it remotely or in the future when travel opens up again. But those opportunities, I think, come to us because we, over time, have these amazing alumni doing well in the industry. It helps the ranking of our program go up. It's not just because we're teaching something so fantastic that we are getting these opportunities and then we are getting ranked the way we are. It's because we have people out there in the industry who've been through our program who are representing us so well. And so we're really thankful that we get opportunities like that and hope that those will continue. But it really does help us expand our understanding of sport holistically so that we can educate our students even better.
Yes, and you just celebrated the 20th anniversary of Center for Sport Leadership, and I went to your celebration, and a number of your alums were there. Very impressive group, just hearing what they're doing now, not just in Virginia, but across the globe. This is a question that came in, and maybe a little difficult to answer this one, Carrie, but it relates to now that families are together, spending more time together, not so much going to the athletic fields, whether it's soccer or baseball or whatever it might be. Has that, and maybe it's too early to tell, and you have a young family too, and you're a very athletic family. Has that dynamic changed? Has the interest dropped on going out there, or is it kind of pent up demand, you think, saying, I need to get my sons or daughters out there again to be with their friends, build those relationships again? This is one of those things that's one of those side mental facts, as you say, how can we overcome these things? So have you had discussions at all with your family or other families about how that dynamic has changed?
That's a really good question. And I would say I've seen both sides of it. And I think in the end, that's what's going to happen is you're almost going to have like two categories that families end up falling into. So for sure. And I will say I can sympathize with both as a family with two young kids at home and a husband who is a youth soccer coach. So this is really something that we as a family are missing. I think you're going to have the families who are desperate for interaction with others, who are so excited to go back and interact with others, be back with their friends, who are going to really not have a lot of hesitation about going back as long as the return to sport is done in a way that protects the safety or does as much as you possibly can to care for the well-being and safety of those involved, whether that be the youth sports or going back to attend college professional events. I do think, though, I will tell you, my husband received a call recently. So he is with the Richmond Strikers Youth Organization, and they're talking about plans to go back ultimately and what's that going to look like. And he had a family who said, how can you expect that families are just going to jump right back into, you know, being on the soccer field 4 nights a week when we've become so used to us being together all the time and playing family games and having dinners together. And now we're just going to go from that great bond that we created as a family back into now we never see each other because we're going here and there to every event that we have. And so I think you are going to have some who are falling on that side of things as well, who really have embraced this, like going back to the basics almost as a family, because you really only can be with your family. And so, I mean, do I ultimately think it's going to change what happens with sports? No, but I do think that you may see some who do make different decisions as a result of this, as a financial decision for their family, or as a, you know, we're more bonded as a family now. I mean, ultimately, I guess only time will tell, right? Like that's the answer to every question you have asked today. But I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, right? To go just from, we went from something so drastic to something else so drastic with quarantine. And then can we just jump right back in? But in reality, I don't think you're going to see just jumping back right back in, because I don't think it's going to be an option. I think like the phases out of quarantine, that's probably how you will see sport phase back in. So I don't think it will be this sort of abrupt change. I think it will happen gradually, and that will probably allow people some time to make those decisions that are best for their family. That's a great question, though.
And Carrie, there are many more questions rolling in, and these are not easy ones to answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because you can field any question, I know. Okay, we're coming back. You know, these are great sports. People love sports, but you can't have fans in the stands. So what is that like? But also there's a chance for innovation too. So as you're thinking through this, I know it's probably a little early in that regard, but even your program, just saying how we're training our leaders to cope with these different changes. What innovations are you seeing maybe on the horizon in the short term? How do we deal with that? Because that's, and even from an athlete standpoint, you were an athlete and you love to roar the crowd when you do something well and that type of thing. You may not have that now. So has that been discussed in with your group, saying how do we maybe look differently down the road with our curriculum and how we can face this new reality?
That is going to be very different, I would say, especially for the athletes, because, and even this weekend, so this weekend, the German Bundesliga came back to play in empty stadiums. I think they said there were about 300 people in each stadium, and that's just essential personnel. So as a player, I think it's probably as big an adjustment of anyone, because you feed off of that energy in the stadium, especially at a college and professional level, maybe a little bit less so in youth sports. So I think mentally there's going to have to be more training on how you kind of self-motivate or pump up your teammates or do some of that you're typically getting from the crowd atmosphere. I think as on the business side of things, this is a huge revenue stream that we are missing out on. The ticket and gate receipts are the either number 1 or 2, depending on which sources you look at, streams of revenue for the sports scene. And so now that you don't have that, what can you do? And so I would say, I think historically, while we probably had the technology to do so, I think that there's been a hesitation, and I should say this is my opinion. I think there has been a hesitation for some professional sport leagues and organizations to invest really, really heavily in technology to enhance the at-home viewing experience, because they wanted you to come watch the game at the stadium or at the arena. So even though probably they could have enhanced what you're seeing at home, they didn't want to do it so much so to where you were like, well, I'm just going to watch at home because I can see a much better game than if I go in the stadium, which is true. If you really just want to watch the game, you're much better off watching at home with the camera angles and the behind the scenes. So now that fans can't be in the stadium and organizations have lost that revenue stream, I'm curious if they will invest more heavily in the technology associated with better viewing experiences at home. So I think things like augmented reality and virtual reality, I think some of those things will be more supported by the professional organizations because they want to increase their TV revenue when they can't get anything from the stadium. So there are leagues and organizations that have sort of dabbled with that a little bit. And I did just read that one VR service, Next VR, has just been bought by Apple. And so I don't think that's coincidental. They're an official partner of the NBA, and that VR organization has also worked with the NBA, the NFL, WWE, some other. So yeah, I do think technology is probably our biggest growth area, and that it is going to be, you'll see it maybe invested in a little bit more so that we can continue to have fans watching until they can get back into the arenas and stadiums.
Okay, we have probably time for one more question. And this question comes in about global sports overall. And it's obviously your opinion. What's going to happen? Do you see a shrinking marketplace? Meaning, will there be pressure on wages? Athletes maybe not paid as much. TV rights are shrinking. What does that mean for the industry overall? So this is a very broad question, but I'll let you finish up with that very broad question with your broad experience, Carrie.
So my opinion would be that temporarily, yes, you will see it shrink for just the reasons that were suggested. I mean, in a lot of the leagues, they're now, so one, with the professional teams, you have the safety issue. Can we come back and what does that look like, right? So a lot of the US leagues are looking at this sort of bubble or biosphere model. The MLS is really heavily considering this, where they'll bring all 26 teams to the Wide World of Sport complex in Orlando. They all stay in the same hotels, no fans or families, so they're sort of protected, high levels of testing. So one, it's what can we do that's still safe for people? But two, there's also the discussion about what does this mean for player salaries? And there is potential delay of teams coming back because of some of these arbitration discussions. Major League Baseball is one of them having that now. So I think that in the short term, yes, I think that we're going to see it take a while to bounce back financially for the market to completely come back. But do I think that that's a permanent change? Personally, my opinion is it's not. I think we are just seeing that people are desperate for sports. And so as soon as we can get them back safely, as soon as people are allowed back in the stadiums, as soon as people can play youth sports as they did before, I do personally think that it will bounce back. Just all the evidence has shown us that it was such a growth market that I think ultimately it will come back, but I think it will take a few years before we're back to where we were before the pandemic.
Carrie, I love your optimism, as you always are. And I think you're absolutely right. This is one of those things that people love sports. I love sports. It's global in nature. It breaks down barriers, all those things that we all love talking about. The Olympics are canceled. All those things are not negative. They're going to come back. There's one thing you did mention about Wide World of Sports in Orlando. You forgot one thing to mention, and I'll finish with that. It's Walt Disney World is Disney, right? You didn't mention Disney. I'm very partial to Disney, as you know. So I'll just remember that the next time you talk about Wide World of Sports. So, all right, Carrie, you've been great, and I knew you would be. So we're out of time. We're at the 45-minute mark. So unfortunately, we have a lot of more questions rolling in. People want to hear from you, Carrie. So maybe we'll do an extended version of this the next time, or they can come visit on campus when we're allowed to come back safely. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Carrie, a wonderful job, as I knew you would do, and hope to see you in person soon. So thank you.
Thank you.